Hello everyone. How you doing today? Glad to be here, glad to be with you. I hope that you all are having a lovely afternoon. I am here in the conference room. No one's around, there's big glass walls. So on that note, I think it is safe, since I am pretty far from everybody else, to just take this mask off and engage with you all face to face, so to speak. How you doing, folks? Glad you're joining us today. Got a lot to discuss. I did a live last night to discuss the recent debate. So now that that's already discussed, I'm going to try to talk about other things, though I do have a few things I do want to say on the debate. There's a couple, remaining thoughts on the debate that I do want to give, but not yet. So if you haven't done so, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to post this on Reddit. Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this as your Facebook status. Bring your friends, bring a community. I always am happy to answer your super chat questions. I'm always happy to engage with you. A lot that we can discuss. It's a lovely afternoon. It's the very end of September. So those of you who are patrons, hold tight, because I will be doing, I do it once a month, and I will be doing it, I'll be doing it in the next couple days. I'll have our September patrons only live stream. It'll be at the beginning of October, but that's okay. I want to schedule it at a time that is ideal, but hold tight. The announcement will be going out if you're a patron, when we will have our patrons only stream. But this afternoon, I'm here. This is public. I will engage. And so let's jump right into it. Folks, while the country is reacting to that awful presidential debate, there are a couple things that are worth noting that are getting background treatment in the news. Item number one, BuzzFeed, the popular social media outlet, is now informing millennials, that's the younger generation, that it's totally okay to live with your parents into adulthood. Totally fine. Don't worry about it. If you're stuck living at home for the rest of your life, if you're well into adulthood, if you're into your late 20s and 30s and you're still living with your parents, don't worry about it. Doesn't matter that the American dream has been stripped away. Doesn't matter that you've been robbed. Writing it down. Nasser. Doesn't matter that you've been robbed of the dignity of adulthood. Doesn't matter that capitalism has deprived you of the right and the ability to go out on your own and live an independent life. If you are an adult, just be okay with the fact that you're not making enough money to have your own life. That's what BuzzFeed is telling us. Don't be outraged. Don't be angry. Don't be frustrated. Just, be okay with it. Hey, it's totally okay to be living at home as an adult. Now, if you are a young person in the United States of America, let me emphasize, if you are a young worker in the United States of America right now, seeing BuzzFeed in this condescending way tell you that you don't have the right to the dignity of adulthood, that it's okay for your employers at Starbucks, your employer at Walmart, your employer at whatever company you work at the Amazon warehouse, your employer at the shipping company, it's totally okay for your employer to not pay you enough money that you can experience the American dream. It's totally okay to have your employers working you hard, driving you harder and harder to work, but not give you the dignity of having your own apartment, your own house, your own family. That's what BuzzFeed is telling you. It's perfectly okay. The fact that millions of American working class people whose parents had good-paying jobs in steel mills and in auto plants and factories. The fact that BuzzFeed is telling you that a life of low-wage, short-term service sector jobs where you don't have the dignity of having your own life, where you are stuck as a permateen, a permanent teenager, where you're stuck with short-term gigs, where you're stuck in the service sector serving the public, where you're stuck without the dignity of living on your own. The fact that BuzzFeed wants you to accept that, wants you to accept the fact that you will not have the dignity of a working class life, the fact that you will be a dependent your whole life. Right. Armenia, Azerbaijan. The fact that BuzzFeed wants you to accept that should be a huge source of burning outrage. Look, you know it, and I know it. The millennial generation is one of the most highly qualified generations in American history. More millennials have gone to college than any other generation in U.S. history. When it comes to computer skills, when it comes to knowledge about history and about facts, when it comes to the ability to program on computers, when it comes to the skills that are important in our high-tech economy, millennials are ahead of their parents. Millennials are qualified. Millennials work hard. What do they get in exchange? More student debt, lower wages, and a lack of the basic dignity that once came with adulthood. Look, we all know, older folks will talk about it sometimes. They'll admit that, yes, they didn't graduate from high school, but they still got a job and a Maupin thought. All right. They still got a job. They still got a job at an auto plant, at a steel mill. They still got enough money to support a family with kids, to buy a house in the suburbs. But if you're a working class person from this generation, BuzzFeed wants us to believe that it is perfectly fine to be stuck in a life low-wage service sector jobs without enough money to have your own adult dignity and independence. The fact that BuzzFeed is trying to get you to accept that should be a source of burning outrage. Look, folks, I remember when I was in college, I had to go through a lot of these job training workshops they give you as you're graduating, because every college wants, its alumni to be employed. I remember sitting in a workshop about how to get a job, one of these job training, how to go get a job workshops they made us take when I was in college. And I remember hearing them say, I'll never forget this. This is where we're at. This was in 2009, 2010, amid the financial crisis. If you really want a job, find the company you want to work for and work for them for free for 2 years. Find a job you want to have. Go to the company you want to work for and volunteer to do an unpaid internship for 2 years, in the hopes that during that 2 years, you will make such a good impression that then they will hire you afterwards and give you a salary. Now, this is what they expect young people to be okay with. You're supposed to be okay with that. Oh, that's okay. I can't get a job that supports me enough, but I'm going to find a company to work for, and I'm going to work for them for 2 years for free, and hopefully they like me enough afterwards, gee golly, and then I'll get hired. Now, China undermining U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, at the same time, they're trying to get us to accept low pay, low conditions. At the same time, they're telling us we should work for free for the company we want to work for 2 years. They've got all these programs on television. Rags to Riches, MTV Cribs, Real Housewives of New Jersey. And they want us to believe that if you don't have a huge level of wealth, if you don't live the lifestyle of one of these people on these demented, wealth-worshipping reality television shows, if you don't have that lifestyle, you are a, quote, loser. You are worthless. They have set a generation up to have lower wages, lower salaries, lower conditions ever before, on the one hand, but have bigger expectations, bigger aspirations, on the other hand. And they wonder why young people in this country are so depressed and so mentally ill and drinking lots of alcohol and being suicidal and taking opioids. What has been done to the younger generation in this country by capitalism should be a source of burning outrage. Should be a source of burning outrage. The younger workers. Okay, color revolutions. To install socialism. What the younger generation of the working class in the United States is being told they should accept is outrageous. Now, I'm not into the whole generation gap thing. You know, there are a lot of baby boomer radicals who I deeply love and I've learned a lot from, and that's a 1960s thing. Hey, man, don't trust anyone over 30. I'm not into that. But I will say, if Donald Trump wins the presidency once again, he will be the oldest president the United States has ever had. And if Joe Biden defeats Donald Trump in this upcoming election, he will be the oldest president the United States has ever had. There's a generational crisis in both parties. In both parties. There's a generational crisis in U.S. society. They are trying to transition the country to a low-wage police state. They are driving living standards down. And a big part of the way they are doing that is generational. You know, they're not going to take the wages away from a certain sector of the U.S. population, right? They'll let the older folks retire, but their kids are never going to have anything near the economic standard of living their parents once had. And they want us to accept that, right? When you roll back the influence of the labor movement, when you eradicate from people's minds the notion of class struggle, when you tell them that talking about workers and bosses is wrong, that concepts like exploitation, concepts like public ownership of the means of production, concepts like workers' power are forbidden, when leftism becomes simply about identity politics, when the right glorifies capitalism, you get a situation where millions of people come to believe that they have no choice but to accept horrendous conditions. Yes, BuzzFeed says we should just be okay as a generation with the fact that millions of millennials and Zoomers are just going to be living with their parents the whole life. They'll never have the dignity of their own home, of their own chance at adulthood. That is a source of burning outrage. Great article by Helen Bukowski about it, where she talks about how ridiculous it is. How ridiculous it is. Ridiculous it is. That the voices representing the American establishment are telling the next generation they should accept falling deeper and deeper and deeper into poverty. That we should accept things like 2 years of unpaid labor just to get a job with enough to pay our rent and live on our own. That we should just be okay with a lifetime of low-wage, short-term service sector jobs because we've got fancy phones and we can play on the internet. That makes up for it, right? Sure, we can't pay our bills, but when we do have money, we get fancy phones and we get to TikTok, so it's all okay, right? It's all okay. Our parents didn't have fancy phones. I mean, this is something that should fill you with outrage, and we know the only way out of this mess is class struggle. And there is going to have to be an awakening of class struggle in the United States. The Communist Party in the 1930s, they said, don't starve, fight. They went out and they built unemployment councils. They organized veterans for the bonus march, demanding veterans' benefits be paid. There was class struggle in the streets. There was a huge Communist Party that was being organized, and it was under those conditions that the ruling class was forced to accept the fact that it was going to have to create a bigger welfare state. And it's only going to be through economic struggle that these things are going to happen again. Look, at the end of the day, identity politics is not going to solve this problem. In fact, a lot of the identity politics crowd think that Americans should be poorer. Right? We've seen instances where the identity politics crowd has gone as far as actually trying to shut down any voice that would speak about the issue of class. So the identity politics crowd isn't going to do it. The synthetic left isn't going to do it. But you and me and the millions of people that don't want to accept this, we're going to have to step up. Because at the end of the day, only class struggle, only working class peoples talking as workers, only what they call class reductionism, only what gets you banned from leftist spaces, only the economic arguments for socialism and the mobilization of the working class to seize control of the means of production, only that is going to get us out of this crisis. You know it, and I know it. And on that basis, we have to understand where this country is headed. Capitalism is in crisis. Wages are dropping. They don't have a place for us in the means of production any longer. The only way out is class struggle. Now, in other news, unrelated to last night's debate debacle, the Vatican snubbed Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, the warmongering fanatic who wants to destabilize Venezuela and wants to escalate tensions with Iran. And, Mike Pompeo, doing his European tour, he was snubbed by the Pope. Very interesting. There is a gap between the Vatican and the United States. The Vatican tends to follow European capital. However, it seems like Trump is very much, and the Republican Party is very much courting a layer of conservative American Catholics, with Amy Coney Barrett, and before him, Brett Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, and that the American conservative Catholics and the Vatican are also pretty far apart. So I wanted to make a note of that. So, in other news, North Korea, their ambassador to the UN, Kim Song, gave an address to the UN General Assembly that is being ignored largely by mainstream media, but it's worth checking out. Listen to the North Korean address. North Korea said that the only way to ensure peace... Okay. Let's go. All righty. The only way to ensure peace is to, quote, have absolute strength to prevent war. And he emphasized that North Korea was developing a new strategic weapon. And he defended, in his remarks to the UN General Assembly, he defended North Korea's decision to proliferate nuclear weapons, saying it was necessary for self-defense. Look, I was optimistic. I was very, very optimistic. Very optimistic when Donald Trump met with Kim and Kim Jong-un. I was optimistic. I was hopeful that something good might come out of that. But unfortunately, it appears that somebody in Trump's administration, most likely John Bolton, made sure that there was not an effort to move ahead. North Korea is talking about keeping its nuclear weapons, and there's not hope for, more peace on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea wanted that. China wanted that. Trump appeared to want that. He wanted to take credit for it. But we then remember how in Spain, one of North Korea's missions was attacked by individuals linked to the CIA, right? Got no coverage over here, but, as Trump is trying to negotiate with North Korea, the CIA attacks the North Korean mission in Spain, embassy in Spain, and a whole bunch of people, get hurt. And it was pretty clear that within Trump's administration, there was a huge effort to prevent Trump from negotiating peace on the Korean Peninsula. And at the moment, as much as North Korea would like to be able to give up its nuclear weapons, as much as Russia and China would like North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, as much as South Korea would like to have a situation where there's no nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula and they can trade with their country folk in the north, that is not happening. It is not happening because of global capitalism. Right? North Korea is not being assured of its security and does not feel safe giving up its nuclear weapons. And the United States, despite the South Korean people electing Moon Jae-in, who is far more sympathetic to the northern country folk and wants to negotiate, despite that, the war parties in Washington, D.C. are determined to keep the conflict on the Korean Peninsula going. And as a result, North Korea is in a position where they say that they're not willing to give up, and they're actually in the process of developing what they call a new strategic weapon to defend themselves. This is the situation. What other news? Folks, I don't want to be too much of a downer on here. All right, Vietnam-China hostilities. Don't want to be too much of a downer on here, but I think it needs to be said. Folks, I was recently re-listening to my debate with Stefan Molyneux from a few months back. A few months back, those of you who may not be aware, I debated the libertarian, right-wing, white supremacist Stefan Molyneux, and I creamed him. The subject of our debate was the fall of the Soviet Union a good thing, and I blew him out of the water. He released a version of it where you couldn't really hear my voice, but on my channel I have a version where you can very clearly hear everything I say. So take a listen to the audio recording of it on my channel. I blew him out of the water. But during that debate, just like during every debate about communism that you have, he starts throwing out a body count. Communism killed quadrillion people. And of course, this is because famines happened. And of course, the famines that happened, they say, are quote-unquote man-made famines. Man-made famines. Well, folks, there are man-made famines caused by capitalism all over the world every day. And one of those man-made famines is happening right now in Yemen. Yemen, a country on the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen. At this point in Yemen, 22.2 million people are in dire need of food. Meanwhile, 8.4 million people are already in conditions of severe famine. 56,000 Yemenis have already died on the battlefield. What is happening in Yemen? The people in Yemen want to be free. They want to control their own country. 2015, they toppled Mansour Hadi, the Saudi puppet, the unelected, undemocratic leader. They staged a fake election. He was the only candidate allowed on the ballot. And the people of Yemen rose up and toppled him. And it's a coalition, a revolutionary committee In the Yemeni government at this point, you've got, who do you have? You have many different forces. You've got the Houthi and Ansar movement. You've got the southern movement that wants to restore the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, the socialist, Republic of Yemen that existed in the south of the country. You've got supporters of the former President Saleh. You've got Arab nationalists, Nasserists, Baathists. You've got a whole coalition of people in Yemen that want to free their country from Saudi, i.e. U.S. domination, and to stop the Yemeni people from fighting for their national liberation. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, armed with U.S.-made weapons, right? U.S.-made tanks, U.S.-made cruise missiles, U.S.-made rifles, U.S.-made guns, with Pentagon generals advising the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They have unleashed a torrent of death and destruction onto the people of Yemen to keep their country poor. And at this point, 22.2 million people are in dire need of food, are facing severe famine conditions because of capitalism, because global financial capitalism, the global oil banker monopolies want to keep Yemen under their grip. But the people of Yemen are fighting back. They are resisting. And of course, American media would insist, oh, the Yemeni people, they're all just a big puppet of Iran. This is Iran. This is Iran. Really? Do you really believe that for 5 years, one of the poorest countries in the world has been withstanding an all-out onslaught from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with the biggest military budget in that region, the fourth largest military budget in the world? Do you really believe that one of the poorest countries in the world could withstand that level of onslaught simply if they were just simply Iranian stooges? That is absolutely ridiculous. The Yemeni people are facing a famine. They are dying in mass. They are suffering, but they are refusing to surrender. Yemen is fighting back. The people of Yemen are resisting imperialism and demanding the right to control their own country. And in response to that, the imperialists are trying to starve and kill them. What is happening to the people of Yemen is a crime of capitalism. In order to preserve their profits, the Wall Street monopolists, the Pentagon war hawks, and the Saudi autocracy are killing millions of people. This is a man-made famine happening right now. And in Yemen, it is the Shia revolutionaries in the Houthi Ansar movement. It is the communists in the southern movement who want to restore the DPRY. It is the Arab nationalists, Nasserists, and Baathist Arab socialists who are resisting that famine and fighting for Yemen to control its own destiny. Marx believed using the state. I thought it was worth mentioning. Furthermore, nuclear power, nuclear fusion, compact nuclear fusion is moving ahead. If we can get to a world beyond fossil fuels, that will lead to something very, very exciting for the human race. So I'm very excited about the developments going on in nuclear fusion. Just thought I'd mention that. So now, a few more comments about that debacle debate we just witnessed last night. I gave my reaction immediately afterwards, sitting in front of my bookshelf. Now, I've got a few other quick comments about it. First of all, national health care. The majority of Americans want guaranteed health care. The majority of Americans want the right to see a doctor when they are sick. The majority of Americans want to have guaranteed health insurance. They don't want to lose their health care when they lose their job. They don't want to lose their health care because of a pre-existing condition. They don't want to lose their health care because they run out of money. They want guaranteed health care. The majority of Americans want guaranteed health care. But last night, you will see that Trump accused Biden of wanting that. Biden said, I don't want Medicare for all. Oh, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. And he said, well, your party does. And he said, I am the Democratic Party, and I don't want that. So the majority opinion in the United States right now, which is that you should be able to go to the doctor no matter what your job is, no matter how much money you have in the bank. You should be able to go to the doctor when you are sick and get medical treatment. The majority opinion, during a pandemic, mind you, had no place on the presidential stage. Trump accused Biden of believing it. Biden said he didn't believe it. Trump said, well, the majority of Democrats, your party believes that. And he said, I am the Democratic Party. Folks, I'll take Biden at his word. Biden is the Democratic Party. He is absolutely right about that. And if you are a socialist, or maybe if you're not a socialist, if you just advocate a bigger welfare state, if you think that people shouldn't be facing student debt for decades because they want to go to college, if you think that people have the right to have a doctor when you're sick, the Democratic Party does not want you. The Democratic Party does not want you. They have made that abundantly clear. The crooked political machines that run the Democratic Party don't want you in their party. They don't want Bernie Sanders. They've rigged it against him. They don't want Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They gave her 60 seconds to speak at the Democratic National Convention. Right? They do not want you in the Democratic Party. They might want you to vote for them, but they don't want your policies, your influence, your perspective. They don't want you in the Democratic Party. Joe Biden is the Democratic Party. Joe Biden was not lying when he said, I am the Democratic Party. And if you actually want better conditions for America's working families, they do not want you in the party. They don't want you. They don't want you. And it's about time you got that through your head. It's about time you just kind of came to terms with it. The Democratic Party does not want progressives. The Democratic Party does not want social democracy. The Democratic Party especially does not want socialists and Marxists. They don't want you. And you'll notice that the Republican Party does want the extreme wing of their view. The Republican Party wants the extreme right. Donald Trump was asked to disavow white supremacists. He said, Proud Boys, stay back, stand by. Couldn't bring himself to denounce the Proud Boys. Could not bring himself to denounce the Proud Boys. Couldn't do it. He could not bring himself to actually denounce the Proud Boys. Whereas Joe Biden, from the moment that debate was going, I hate Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders awful. Oh, far left socialist. Yeah, I don't agree with them. They're a scum. The Democrats have no problem spitting on their base, spitting on the far left. Meanwhile, Trump could not bring himself to diss the Proud Boys. Think about that. Trump wants the Proud Boys. Biden does not want you. Trump wants the Proud Boys. Biden does not want you. You need to come to terms with that. You need to recognize that. The sooner you come to understand that, the better. The Democratic Party at this point represents the Eastern establishment, the Wall Street monopolists that see Donald Trump as representing a chaotic right-wing insurgency that is destabilizing the country. They want to restabilize it. Biden has gone to Wall Street and said, don't worry, I'll keep all of Trump's economic policies intact. He's made very, very clear that he is not going to change the economic setup of the country. Don't worry. He'll keep the tax cut system the way it is. He'll keep the deregulation that Trump has imposed. He will not change the healthcare system. He will leave, the disastrous Obamacare system intact. Yeah. Joe Biden does not want you. You need to recognize that. You just need to recognize that. The sooner you recognize that, the healthier you're going to be, as long as you're in denial about that. You just need to come to terms with it. But now, because of Donald Trump's remarks about the Proud Boys organization, a very strange group started by comedian Gavin McInnes, young men only. They don't masturbate. They really love, quote unquote, Western civilization. They claim it's not racial, but it kind of is. Now that the Proud Boys are all over the media, people are talking about them because of Donald Trump's statement about them. Because of that, I thought it might be interesting to point out one of the slogans of the Proud Boys. What is the slogan of the Proud Boys? What is one of the things that they chant constantly? What is one of the most frequent employed slogans of the Proud Boys? What is it? West is the best. West is the best. West is the best. They believe that the Western capitalist countries, like the United States, like Britain, like France, like Germany, that they are the ideal way of being. That their notion of what freedom is, their notion of how you should run society, their belief in free markets, they believe, quote, West is the best. And you know what's hilarious? So do the majority of socialists out there. The anti-tanky, and thank you, David, the anti-tanky crowd, the Trotskyites, the anarchists, that's what they believe. Right? You've seen it. When I debated Vaush, he attacked me. You work for RT. Why? Well, RT is not West. If I had worked for ABC, would he have said that? No, of course not, right? You went to Iran. You went on Press TV, right? And of course, would he have said that if I had, gone to Canada? Of course not. Why? Because as far as the Trotskyites are concerned, as far as the anarchists are concerned, as far as the social democrats are concerned, West is the best. That should be the theme of Vaush's program. West is the best. Vaush should join the Proud Boys, because he said himself that the United States is more of a proletarian state than China is. The West is the best. That's what these people believe. And Trotsky himself said this. All right, writing it down. Bolsheviks. Social conservative. Trotsky himself. Right? He lived in New York City. And he said that New York City was the foundry where the fate of mankind would be forged. Trotskyism maintains the theory of permanent revolution. The theory of permanent revolution, which is the idea that Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Vietnam, these countries can't have socialism because they're not rich enough like the Western countries. The only hope for socialism is if socialism comes to being in the West. Why? Because West is the best. That is what these people believe. Right? But Lenin wrote a book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, which basically explained that the Western system of global monopoly capitalism, where big banks, yes, banks, and big multinational corporations and cartels based in the Western countries dominate the global economy, is holding back economic development around the world. That the Western system of big banks and big corporations ruling the world is keeping the world poor. libertarianism. Is keeping the world poor. When the British Empire went to India, it burned down all the textile mills, made the people of India, who'd been weaving cloth for centuries, import their cloth from Britain. Same in Bangladesh. They used to call Bangladesh Sonar Bengal, the golden Bangladesh, for their very, very valuable weaving and silk. The West burned it all down. Right? When the imperialists went to China, they forced China to accept the importing of narcotics with the Opium Wars. Right? All over the world, imperialism, the Western system, is holding back economic development. Holding back economic development, keeping countries as impoverished client states that can't develop their own economy, can't create their own products, and become dependent on Wall Street monopolies. Look at Haiti. Look at the Dominican Republic. Look at Guatemala. Look at Honduras. Look at Nigeria. Nigeria, the top oil-producing country on the African continent, is dirt poor. The oil gets sucked out of the ground and goes into the hands of Wall Street monopolists, and the people of Nigeria are poor, illiterate, not having access to health care, malnutrition in some cases. The global system of monopoly capitalism, where a small group of big banks and corporations based in Western countries dominate the global economy and get richer and richer and richer by making the world poor and keeping the world poor. That system is the main impediment to human progress at this time. And sure, at one point there was a place for you and I in that system. All right, at one point, what made Western capitalism stable was what you could call the labor aristocracy, the aristocracy of labor, a strata of well-paid workers in the Western countries who got decent wages. And as Vietnam was bombed and destroyed, as Korea was bombed and destroyed, as countries around the world were impoverished, there was a layer of workers in the homeland who enjoyed what you might call a middle-class lifestyle. They got some of the crumbs of the imperialist plunder. But the main aspect of the United States in our time is the demolition of the labor aristocracy. That white middle class, that strata of comfortable workers who are right-wing because they are comfortable, is being eliminated. The imperialists no longer need an aristocracy of labor in the homeland. And so the same thing that the imperialists did to Vietnam, to Cuba, to Korea, to Latin America, to Africa, the same thing the imperialists have done in so many parts of the world, economically demolishing countries in order to maintain the rule of big banks and big corporations, grinding nations into poverty so that Wall Street monopolists can set up a global financial dictatorship and suck in super profits. The same thing that has been done to so many countries around the world. The same thing that was done to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. The same thing that was done to Bolivia and Chile and Argentina and Venezuela during the 1990s. That same process where living standards are driven down, where infrastructure is left to crumble, where economies are just gutted and looted. That same process is now being done to the United States of America. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Texas, the heartland of America is falling to shreds right now. It's falling to pieces. The domestic economy of the United States is imploding. It is being demolished. I started out this presentation tonight talking about how BuzzFeed wants you to believe that living with your parents for the rest of your life is fine. You don't need to get enough pay to have a decent life and live on your own. This global system is called imperialism. And it's what Lenin described in his book, Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage. And the hope around the world, the successes around the world, the poverty alleviation around the world has come from countries breaking out of that system. China broke free in 1949, and China is now the second largest economy in the world because the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, are controlled by the people. They're controlled by society. The people, the state, controls the means of production. And as a result of that, they have been able to plan out their economy and raise millions from poverty. Cuba has had huge achievements. Vietnam has had huge achievements. Socialism, where the people of a country take control of their economy and force it to work in their own interests and break out of imperialism and the domination by Wall Street monopolists and big international cartels and control their own economy. Socialism has been very, 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 very successful. And the ruling class of the United States wants to do everything they can to keep you from becoming a socialist, to keep you from understanding this. Because at the end of the day, the only way we can get out of this mess, the only way we can get out is if we do the same thing over here. We, the people of the United States of America, must take control of the U.S. economy. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a state that fights for the people and controls the major centers of economic power to make sure that we can continue to rise and continue to have economic growth. We need to end Wall Street pessimism. We need to end the tyranny of big banks. We need to end the prison industrial complex. We need to end the military industrial complex. We need to control our own economy. We need an economy that serves public good and not profits. We need to move the United States towards socialism. It's the only way out. It's the only way out. And that's my message here. And thank you, Herb. I appreciate the super chat. And so, on that note, folks, since it's the afternoon, thought that I might do something special here. Before we get to answering the super chats, I figured, this is my latest book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. It's available. You can order your copy. Links below. I thought, I read a section of it on a live before, and people liked it. And so I thought I might read section 2. So, at risk of, it's a little long, but, just because I think I'm just going to read section 2 of the Kamala Harris book to you. So on that note, folks, before we open up for before I start answering your super chats, before I start doing the roll call, I think I'm just going to read section 2 of my new book on Kamala Harris. I'm going to read it to you. So now, I read to you some of section 1, which is called Where Did Kamala Harris Come From? Right? This is the table of contents, right? It's a Center for Political Innovation book. This is the table of contents. Section 1 is called Where Did Kamala Harris Come From? Section 2 is called Psychology Behind Politics, and Section 3 is called The Geopolitical Stage. I am going to read to you probably the most controversial section of this book. I'm going to read it to you. Hope you like it. So sit tight. I've got plenty of water in case my throat gives out. And I'm going to read to you Section 2. Section 2 of Kamala Harris and the Future of America, available below. What the heck? Why not? So this is the most controversial section. of the new Kamala Harris book. I'm sure that if Kamala Harris herself has read it, which I really doubt, I doubt she's read it, but I'm sure people in her office have gotten their hands on this probably. There's not that many books available with her name in the title. I'm sure that they're not happy about this, but I'm going to read it anyway. So I'm just going to read it to you. Section 2, Psychology Behind Politics. Here goes. When examining the life story and personalities of the 4 most recent U.S. presidents, striking similarities can be found. U.S. President Bill Clinton never met his biological father. He was raised by his mother. An alcoholic and abusive stepfather came and went. Bill Clinton discovered at a relatively young age that he had a high amount of charisma in both public speaking and in one-on-one interactions. This charm probably developed from being mother's little boy and consoling and entertaining his maternal companion. Furthermore, due to life circumstances, Clinton's mother was most likely pushing him and was highly invested in seeing him succeed. Despite growing up in very different parts of the country and world, Barack Obama's life story and personal development path is eerily similar. Obama's biological father separated from his mother when he was a small child. Obama wrote a memoir about this experience and how it affected him, entitled Dreams from My Father. Obama was raised by his mother, Ann Dunham, and his grandparents. For a few years, Obama and his mother lived with a stepfather who was a leader of the Indonesian military. Many have speculated that domestic violence may have played a role in the separation and divorce of Ann Dunham from Lolo Soetoro, though this allegation is not widely reported as it was in the case of Bill Clinton's stepfather. Obama's mother had big aspirations for her son, and like Bill Clinton, the young Obama discovered he had a talent for winning people's trust and charming an audience. Both Clinton and Obama came from relatively modest middle-class backgrounds, but moved up through the channels of U.S. society, namely Ivy League schools, where potential leaders are vetted. Both of them became 2-term U.S. presidents from the Democratic Party, and both of them were strongly committed to regime change operations conducted in the name of human rights. Both of them developed a style of rhetoric, channeling radicals of the past. Bill Clinton evoked memories of Southern populists and labor leaders. Barack Obama evoked memories of the civil rights movement. However, despite their deeply impactful rhetoric, they both delivered fairly moderate and unexciting economic and social policies. They learned the art of being radical and inspirational. All right. Bolivia. Radical and inspirational in tone, but lacking. They learned the art of being radical and inspirational in tone while moderate in content. Audiences were inspired by the radicalism and optimism in their voices while ignoring the banality of the actual words they spoke. Just as they stood before their mothers as boys, giving them hope in hard times and cheering them on in a rainy day, they now stood before America, reassuring them with talk of change you can believe in and coming from a little place called hope. Meanwhile, Donald Trump and George W. Bush also have very similar life stories. The father of George W. Bush was none other than CIA Director, Vice President, and eventually President George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush grew up in the household of a highly successful father, viewed as the screw-up, the failure, and the disappointing son. The youthful years of George W. Bush involved struggling with alcoholism and cocaine and performing poorly in academics. But the young W. loved to be the life of the party and seemed to have a very strong desire to win the approval of others. Following his education at elite schools, he was involved in a series of failed business ventures before turning to politics almost as a last resort. the surprise of his mother and brothers, George W. Bush became governor of Texas and eventually president of the United States. His bumbling malapropisms and his almost childlike desire to win the approval of others became a winning attribute, making Bush seem more human and genuine than his rivals. Donald Trump also had a highly achieving father who viewed him as a disappointment. Trump's father was a wealthy New York City real estate giant, well connected to the inner circles of New York City's political elite. Trump's father sent his teenage son to a military boarding school known for straightening out rebellious young men with harsh discipline. Trump, of course, had something to prove. He entered adulthood determined not only to make money, but to make a name for himself. Like Bush, Trump spent his youth as the life of the party and seemed to have a desperation for media attention and the approval of others. Like George W. Bush, Trump engaged in a series of grandiose yet failed business ventures before ultimately turning to politics. Trump, like Bush, became appreciated for his poor use of the English language. This made him seem more average and less manufactured than standard politicians. The crassness and impoliteness of his words also won him admiration and media attention. Bush was known for his Texas accent, his improper grammar, and his pushing of the envelope when it came to authoritarianism. He spoke of fighting terrorists like a cowboy movie, saying he would smoke them out, and defending the use of torture. Trump is known for making wildly factually inaccurate statements, as well as wildly self-aggrandizing ones. Trump is known for making, I already read that. His rhetorical style includes giving demeaning nicknames to his political rivals and emphasizing how tough he is. Trump has called for the killing of the family members of suspected terrorists and also saying that he believes in torture. Barack Obama and Bill Clinton were certainly not clones. Neither are Trump and George W. Bush. However, their life stories and family histories are eerily similar, and this fact should certainly raise the eyebrows of anyone who has studied personality theory. The position of the U.S. president is vitally important to setting the course of global events. The ability to influence the person in such a position, to push their buttons, to motivate them to take certain actions, and prevent them from taking others is vitally important. Billions of dollars and millions of lives are often on the line. The fact that similar personalities have occupied the Oval Office for the past few decades is not accidental, or merely the natural workings of the political system. One can be sure that the personality of each potential president of the United States is heavily studied from a number of different angles by different forces that seek to push them in one direction or another. The rise of Kamala Harris must be understood in this context. What is her family background? How has it impacted her career trajectory? When discussing someone who was rejected by Democratic primary voters, but is likely to soon have her finger on the nuclear button, it becomes an important question. On the debate stage during the Democratic primary in June of 2019, Kamala Harris often clashed with Joe Biden. Biden and Bernie Sanders were the top two candidates favored among Democratic voters, and Kamala wanted to secure her position in the race. While Kamala clashed with other Democrats, memories of her pre-adolescent childhood were invoked far more frequently than is usual for politicians. Quote, "Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with a neighbor who told us her parents said they couldn't play with us because we were black," she told the millions who watched the debate on CNN. When she went after Joe Biden, her rhetoric got even more personal. "I'm going to direct this at Vice President Biden. I do not believe you are a racist. I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. I also believe it's personal. It was actually hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on segregation of race in this country. It was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. There was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. She was bused to school every day. That little girl was me. These were not accidental or unplanned remarks, as almost immediately afterwards, her campaign website began offering T-shirts and with photographs of Kamala Harris as a small child with her hair in braids. The phrase, "that little girl was me," was immediately all over Twitter. The photo and phrase had been a planned meme for marketing Kamala Harris. However, it points to the fact that Kamala Harris deeply identifies with her pre-adolescent self, and feelings associated with her childhood are a primary motivation for her behavior right up to the present day. The little girl that Kamala invokes and the strong emotions attached to it underlie many of her actions. This theme can be consistently observed throughout her political career. In 2010, Kamala Harris spoke before the Commonwealth Club of California. A disturbing clip of these remarks has become widely circulated, showing a side of Kamala Harris which her campaign would most likely prefer to conceal. In the clip, Kamala boasts that she jailed the parents of truant school kids and laughs about it. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco, she says, with a big grin on her face before breaking into a cackle of sadistic laughter. Frankly, my staff went bananas. They were concerned because they didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in the election. She went on to describe the feelings of power she felt in her position after taking it. Quote, "As prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective goal to get those kids to school." She went on to giggle about a parent showing a letter from the district attorney's office to her children and saying, "If you don't go to school, Kamala is going to put you and me in jail." Most viewers are disturbed by the fact that Kamala Harris seems to relish having a big stick and being able to punish low-income people. The jailing of low-income parents for their children's truancy is unlikely to improve their life circumstances. The fact that Kamala boasts that she rushed to implement this policy as soon as she came into office is equally disturbing. However, the most telling statement in the clip comes just prior to Kamala describing her harsh actions. Kamala stated, quote, "I would not be standing here if it were not for the education I received. And I know many of us would say the same thing. I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy." We see this common pattern in her rhetoric. Kamala Harris invokes her own childhood and how she would, quote, "not be standing here if her parents had not sent her to school," in order to justify her actions. She goes on to boast about how she felt after taking office. She had enough capital to take this dramatic move despite the political risks. She speaks of her big stick. She giggles with delight about how upset her staff was with her decision. She speaks of parents sending their kids to school out of fear of incarceration, and how delighted she felt sending a letter with a district attorney's badge on the letterhead to parents throughout the Bay Area. So why does Kamala seem to invoke childhood memories so much? Why is a woman who is well over 50 years old constantly invoking her life situation during the 1960s and 70s? In February of 2019, Donald Harris, the father of Kamala Harris, opened up about his daughter and her presidential campaign. Anime. He was infuriated because Kamala Harris had stated, quote, "half of my family is from Jamaica. Are you kidding me?" when asked if she had smoked marijuana. Donald's words were harsh. My dear departed grandmothers, as well as my deceased parents, must be turning in their graves right now to see their family's name, reputation, and proud Jamaican identity being connected in any way, joking or not, with the fraudulent stereotype of a pot-smoking joy seeker in the pursuit of identity politics. Speaking for myself and my immediate Jamaican family, we wish to categorically disassociate ourselves from this travesty. Donald Harris is an economics professor, now retired, with emeritus status from Stanford University. To describe Donald Harris as a communist is a bit of an exaggeration. He is certainly heavily influenced by Marx's economic theories in his analysis of unemployment and GDP growth. His writings certainly discuss concepts such as overproduction, the falling rate of profit, and the general law of capitalist accumulation, and apply them when explaining and predicting trends. However, Donald Harris is not a left-wing agitator or really an activist. In addition to teaching courses at Stanford University, Harris served as an economic advisor to 3 Jamaican prime ministers. Social democracy and the Laborite political tradition certainly has a lot of influence in Jamaica. Michael Manley served as prime minister from 1972 to 1980, and from 1989 to 1992. Manley called himself a democratic socialist and enacted many progressive reforms, including the creation of free healthcare clinics, rent and price controls, subsidies of food for low-income people. Donald Harris seems to have functioned not as a political strategist, agitator, or commentator, but as a policy formulator and an interpreter of economic data, giving advice to Jamaican elected officials behind the scenes. He most likely had significant influence within the administrations of a number of prime ministers who struggled to increase living standards and stabilize the impoverished Caribbean country. Aside from his denunciation of his daughter's recent statements about Jamaica, a short essay entitled Reflections of a Jamaican Father. In a short essay entitled Reflections of a Jamaican Father, Donald Harris has so far been mostly silent about his daughter and intends to remain so. However, the essay in which Harris reflects on his upbringing is quite revealing and provides us with some insights into what underlying motivations lay beneath Kamala's words and actions. Donald Harris writes, regarding his 2 estranged daughters, my one big regret is they did not come to know very well the 2 most influential women in my life, Miss Chrissy and Miss Iris, as everyone called them. This is in many ways a story about these women and the heritage that they gave us. My roots go back within my lifetime to my paternal grandmother, Miss Christina Brown, descendant of Hamilton Brown, who is on record as a plantation and slave owner and founder of Brownstown, and my maternal grandmother, Miss Iris Finnegan, farmer and educator from Annantown and Inverness, ancestry unknown. The Harris name comes from my paternal grandfather, Joseph Alexander Harris, landowner and agricultural produce exporter, mostly pimento and allspice, who died in 1939, 1 year after I was born, and is buried in the churchyard of the magnificent Anglican church which Hamilton Brown built in Brownstown, where as a child I learned the catechism and was baptized and confirmed and served as an acolyte. Both of my grandparents had the strongest influence on my early upbringing. Harris reflects on the influence of Miss Chrissy on his trajectory towards studying economics. There was a daily diet of politics as well. She was a great admirer of Busta, Sir William Alexander Bustamante, then chief minister in the colonial government, leader of the Jamaican Labor Party. She claimed with conviction and pride to be a Laborite as a member of the Jamaican Labor Party, as they were called, for the interesting reason that she argued labor is at the heart of everything in life. Little did I know then, what I later learned in studying economics, that my grandmother was espousing her independently discovered version of the labor theory of value. Harris tells a touching anecdote about his two daughters and subtly hints at Kamala's character as a child. Quote, now, far away in the diaspora in 2018, one of the most vivid and fondest memories I have of that early period with my children is a visit we made in 1970 to Orange Hill. We trudged through the cow dung and rusted iron gates, uphill and downhill, along the narrow, unkempt paths to the very end of the family property, all in my eagerness to show the girls the terrain over which I had wandered daily for hours as a boy, with Miss Chrissy hollering in the distance, you better come back now, boy, or else. Upon reaching the top of the little hill that opened up much of that terrain to our full view, Kamala, ever the adventurous and assertive one, suddenly broke from the pack, leaving behind Maya, the more cautious one, and took off like a gazelle in the Serengeti, leaping over rocks and shrubs and fallen branches in utter joy and unleashed curiosity to explore that same enticing terrain. I quickly followed her with my trusted Canon Super 8 movie camera to record the moment in my usual role as cameraman for every occasion. I couldn't help thinking there and then, what a moment of exciting rediscovery being handed over from one generation to another. His reference to Kamala as, quote, ever the assertive or adventurous and assertive one, seems to indicate that these are character traits the VP nominee had in her childhood, which have been carried over into adulthood. One can detect a tone of bittersweet sadness in the memories of Kamala's estranged father. Donald Harris is reflecting on the character of his now world-famous daughter at the age of 6 in 1970, before she was swept out of his life by a divorce that was likely far more ugly than Kamala wants the world to know. Harris writes, quote, this early phase of interaction with my children came to an abrupt halt in 1972, when, after a hard-fought custody battle in family court in Oakland, California, the context of the relationship was placed within arbitrary limits imposed by a court-ordered divorce settlement based on the false assumption by the state of California that fathers cannot handle parenting. Especially in the case of this father, a, quote, Negro from the islands, who was the Yankee stereotype who might just end up eating his children for breakfast. Nevertheless, I persisted, never giving up on my love for my children or reneging on my responsibilities as their father, so here we are now. Donald's words about family court in Oakland completely contradict the presentation of events found in Kamala's autobiography. Kamala writes about her parents' separation, quote, they didn't fight about money. The only thing they fought about was who got the books. Wrestling. It's pretty apparent that her parents fought over a few other things, namely who got custody of Kamala and her younger sister. The fact that Kamala chose to conceal this in her autobiography could be very telling. In another passage, Kamala reflects on her parents' relationship with carefully chosen words. Quote, I've often thought that had they been a little more mature, maybe the marriage could have survived. But they were so young, and my father was my mother's first boyfriend. The implication of this fact about her mother's lack of dating history prior to her marriage could be read as presenting her mother as young and naive, or could instead be interpreted to present her father as predatory. The implication is carefully left to the reader. None of this would be worth discussing if not for the fact that Kamala Harris speaks of her childhood excessively. The implication of some of her statements is that we are expected to vote for her simply out of sympathy for the suffering she endured as a 10-year-old. Sympathy for ethnic minority children and the very real hardships they have endured in times past and still endure across the country is quite an apparent theme in the rhetoric of identity politics. Many black activists, for example, argued that they voted for Barack Obama simply so their children could grow up with the self-esteem of knowing it was possible for them to be president. Kamala's constant invoking of her childhood could simply be about marketing herself in the age of what detractors refer to as ID poll. But other aspects of the biographical narrative put out by Kamala's staff and supporters are worth noting. In addition to the references to her childhood, the Harris campaign has done a lot to canonize her now deceased mother. Shamala Gopalan is presented as a feminist pioneer, immigrating from India, getting her degree, and becoming a cancer researcher. Photos of Shamala have been tweeted out. Anecdotes about her have come up in many of Kamala's speeches. However, Kamala Harris and her campaign are pretty silent in regard to her father. He receives no such canonization, despite also being an immigrant and a man of color who met her mother through left-wing activism. The fact that Donald says he lost his ability to really interact with his daughters in 1972 and that he has denounced her in the press indicates that the relationship between them is weak at best. The harshness of Donald's words, referring to Kamala's campaign as a travesty and engaging in a pursuit of identity politics, certainly stands out. Have the relatives of any potential U.S. president in recent years spoken so harshly? What is the source of the obvious tension and weak relationship between Kamala Harris and her father? Other than the divorce, we really do not know. We can only speculate. In Donald's essay reflecting on his Jamaican upbringing and his relationship with his own daughters, he describes his paternal grandmother and speaks in a positive tone about her use of corporal punishment. Harris writes, "Miss Chrissy was the disciplinarian, reserved and stern in look and firm with the strap, but capable of the most endearing and genuine acts of love, affection, and care." Corporal punishment is widely practiced among Jamaicans and Jamaican Americans even today. In 2020, school teachers in Jamaica are still known to spank or beat students, though officially urged not to do so by the Ministry of Education. The British colonial tradition of 6 of the best canings is something that remains part of the life of school children in many parts of the developing world. Jamaica maintained the practice of sentencing juvenile offenders to floggings with a tamarind switch until 1998. Many Jamaican legislators have proposed that this punishment method be revived as an alternative to jail and received lots of public support in their call. Did Donald Harris beat his daughters? Does Kamala resent him because of this? This is certainly possible. In the 1960s and 70s, corporal punishment of children was far more widely accepted and was nearly expected among both families and schools in the United States across almost all strata of society. Dr. Spock's best-selling book, urging parents to refrain from this traditional disciplinary practice, was often mocked and rejected. Even today, 19 U.S. states still allow teachers in public schools to beat students with wooden paddles. However, the liberal activist and academic environment which Kamala's parents inhabited would most likely have frowned on such methods of child rearing, so this is quite unclear. Is it possible her parents disagreed in regards to how young Kamala and her sister were disciplined? The fixation on vengeful justice and punishment that defines Kamala's adult life would certainly fit the profile one who had experienced harsh beatings as a child. However, In times past, in which extreme corporal punishment was fairly common, many grew into adulthood having experienced such things without the sadistic tendencies that Kamala Harris displays. Perhaps the resentment is rooted in other aspects of her parents' separation. The split between Kamala's parents was clearly not a friendly one. Was the immaturity Kamala blames for the failure of her parents? What was the immaturity Kamala blames for the failure of her parents' parents' marriage? What prompted the divorce? Was there an extramarital affair? Was there domestic violence? Is it possible that Kamala observed her father striking her mother? We do not know the answer to these questions. It is perhaps possible that Donald Harris was nothing but a gentle, patient, loving father. Could it be that Kamala's family experienced financial hardships following the divorce, as the two children were raised by a single mother? Did Shmala perhaps scapegoat her ex-husband and raise Kamala and her sister to believe that he was responsible for the problems of their household? Much has been written about the painful effects of what is called parental-child abduction and alienation, where in divorce proceedings, children are pulled away from one parent and incited against them. This is not done out of a pure intention of protecting children, but out of a selfish desire to spite and punish the other parent. Did Kamala perhaps learn to overlook her mother's shortcomings and channel her frustrations with their life onto a, quote, deadbeat dad from the islands? Donald's essay hints that he is coming from a defensive place and that perhaps his responsibleness as a father has been questioned. In Donald's public denunciation of his daughter, it becomes clear that stereotypes of Jamaicans as lazy, pot-smoking, irresponsible, and not good fathers get under his skin more than anything else. Did young Kamala observe her mother pushing these buttons to evoke her father's rage? Did her mother adopt this narrative about her father, presenting him as such a stereotype to her daughters in the aftermath of the divorce? There is certainly deep pain of some sort underlying Kamala's cruelty. The estrangement from her father is likely to be a major source of such pain. In Truths We Hold, that's Kamala's autobiography, while Kamala clearly glossed over much of the pain of her upbringing, on a few occasions she reveals deep inner damage beneath the surface. She writes, quote, "I invited both of my parents to come to my graduation, even though I knew they wouldn't speak to each other. I still wanted them both to be there for me. I'll never forget sitting in the first couple rows of the auditorium, looking out into the audience. My mother was nowhere to be found. Where is she, I thought? Is she not here because my father is? Then all of a sudden, the back door of the auditorium opened up, and my mother walked in wearing a bright red dress and heels. She was never one to let the situation get the better of her." In this anecdote, once again, Shmala is the hero. The fact that her mother might be so afraid of seeing Donald Harris that she would potentially skip her daughter's graduation ceremony almost a decade after the divorce indicates more than merely bad feelings about a failed marriage. Whether Kamala Harris was aware of it or not, when she destroyed the lives of pot smokers, withheld evidence to convict people, blocked exonerations, and jailed low-income people, she was not protecting the innocent or sticking up for the downtrodden. Putting the parents of low-income truant children in jail often results in pushing them into the foster care system. The results of breaking apart families is tragic. As a result of her many actions as a rising star in California's prosecutorial school-to-prison pipeline apparatus, getting tough on crime and pushing for harsh sentences, countless thousands of children grew up like her without their father. Kamala's use of her cherished big stick to tear apart families, the actions that she cackles about, did not really benefit children. It seems that the, quote, little girl who Kamala frequently invokes, the one who probably once felt powerless and afraid, is seeking to exact revenge. The actual results for actual people are irrelevant. Good for you. As the image of 10-year-old Kamala flickers in her mind, a rage that has burned for decades continues to be kindled. No matter how many lives are destroyed, the world must be made to understand that little girl was me. Much like the similarities between Obama and Clinton, Trump and Bush, Kamala's life story is all too similar to many other prominent female political figures. Amy Klobuchar, the U.S. Senator from Minnesota, also ran for the 2020 Democratic presidential primary, has a similar biography. She was raised by a mother after a divorce. In her case, we know there was domestic violence, with her alcoholic father beating her mother. Like Kamala, Amy was estranged from her father until he became sober decades later. Amy Klobuchar became a criminal prosecutor in the same era and utilized the same fear-mongering tactics, filling prisons in Minnesota with low-income African-American men. Samantha Power, the UN ambassador under Barack Obama, who worked inside the White House pushing for Libya's intervention, shares a similar life story. Power was born in Ireland. When Samantha Power was 9 years old, she moved to the United States with her mother. Power and her mother left behind their father, who died of an alcohol-induced illness a few years later. Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, and Samantha Power have dedicated their lives to punishing and destroying. Harris and Klobuchar destroyed the lives of low-income people, mostly black men, in courtrooms, and rose up in the ranks due to the enthusiasm with which they carried out this task, ensuring huge profits for the prison industrial complex. Samantha Power dedicated her life to building the case not for the incarceration of individuals, but for the military destruction of nations. In her book, The Problem from Hell, America in the Age of Genocide, Power wrote that the U.S. government, quote, needed help from American reporters, editorial boards, and advocacy groups in order to convince the world about the need to ruthlessly bomb and destroy Yugoslavia. Just as a fishmonger sells fish, Samantha Power sold war. She pushed for the bombing of Yugoslavia, the destruction of Libya, and defended efforts to destabilize Syria. Similar to Kamala Harris' jailing of truant parents, the results did not improve people's lives. Millions of Serbians, Syrians, and Libyans were killed, had their homes destroyed, or were forced to become refugees. But to Samantha Power, it wasn't about helping people, but about punishing people. Just like Kamala's imprisoning of low-income parents did not really help their truant schoolchildren. Not surprisingly, Samantha Power built the case for war against regimes that were led by powerful male figures deemed to be a dictator in the Western press. Samantha Power has spent her adult life building the case for military interventions and covert operations to remove strongmen who lead governments and often have somewhat of a fatherly persona. Muammar Gaddafi actually referred to Barack Obama as his little African son. It's easy to speculate that in the psyche of Kamala Harris, the parents of truant children, and the various African-American males she convicted are psychological stand-ins for a dark-skinned father against whom she has a huge amount of rage. Of course, none of this can be certain. In each of these life histories of presidents and political figures, there are undoubtedly countless factors driving their choices and personality developments. Biological factors like brain chemistry, the influence of religion, the personality of influential teachers, mentors, and childhood friends all have an immeasurable impact on how the human mind and personality develops. Books like The Truths We Hold, which are published by politicians aspiring for the presidency, are often carefully edited in order to market the candidate. In the generations past, many Americans grew up hearing a story of George Washington admitting to cutting down his father's cherry tree because, quote, he cannot tell a lie. The story is now universally recognized to be fictional propaganda intended to moralize school children in the generations after George Washington's death. While technology and accessibility of information have certainly changed since the early years of the United States, the dishonest nature of personality cults and political leaders has not. Everything in Kamala's memoirs and speeches and in her father's reflections should be taken with a grain of salt. If Kamala Harris ends up being vice president or president, we will learn infinitely more about her character as it is on display throughout the world. We will see what Kamala has to offer, not just in terms of words, but also in terms of concrete policy that can impact the lives of potentially billions of people. The impulse to destroy and tear things down was a key factor in the bourgeois revolutions to overthrow feudalism and the establishment of liberal societies, which the global economy is now centered around. In 1804, the English poet William Blake composed these words: "Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds unfold. Bring me my chariots of fire. I will not cease from mental strife, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." As these words were written, the world was still reacting to the dramatic events in France during the previous decade. The monarchy had been toppled and a republic had been established. A reign of terror involving mass executions of nobles, priests, and individuals deemed to be contrary to the French Revolution's values had taken place. The guillotine, now used as a class struggle emblem by some young liberal democratic socialists, was used to behead thousands of people in a carnival-like atmosphere. The French Revolution involved the active deconstruction, not only of the feudal economic and political order, but the mindset that went along with it. Peasants who had been forbidden from even looking nobles in the eye had been forced to bow and obey in almost every aspect of life, were suddenly given permission to unleash their rage. This explosion of rage shook all of society and enabled the capitalists to take power away from the feudal aristocrats. Previously restrained sexual impulses were also unleashed. The Marquis de Sade, the pornographic French writer for whom the term sadism is derived, was a key figure in the French Revolution. Andrew Yang. Sade had been imprisoned at the Bastille for his sexual assaults. He had screamed out of the windows to the crowds on the streets of Paris that prisoners inside were being tortured and cruelly treated. Sensing that the Marquis was agitating Parisians and potentially causing unrest, the jailers transferred him to a mental hospital outside of the city. 10 days after the Marquis de Sade was removed from the infamous prison, mobs of revolutionaries stormed it on July 14, 1789. The storming of the Bastille is considered an iconic moment in French history, celebrated as a national holiday. The Marquis de Sade's role in the French Revolution was not limited to agitation from prison windows. Sade was a keynote speaker at the funeral of Jacobin agitator Jean-Paul Marat. All right. Soviet referendum. Islam. All right. Giving a glowing eulogy. For the Marquis de Sade, sexuality and violence were closely linked to each other, and unleashing both signified the liberation of mankind. Indeed, the unleashing of passion and rage was key in bringing down feudalism. As a result of the French Revolution, it has become an almost permanent attribute of leftist politics as it has developed. The terms left and right actually originated in the French National Assembly, formed amid revolutionary upheaval. Those loyal to the king sat on the right, while the radicals and advocates of liberté, égalité, fraternité sat on the left. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, wrote that renegotiating the restraints imposed by society on the natural impulses of individuals toward violence and sex is a key factor underlying many political conflicts throughout history. Freud wrote, "The liberty of the individual is no gift to civilization. The development of civilization imposes restrictions on it, and justice demands that no one escape these restrictions. What makes itself felt in a community as a desire for freedom may be their revolt against some existing injustice, and so many prove favorable to further development of civilization. It may remain compatible with civilization, but it also may spring from the remains of their original personality, which is still untamed by civilization, and thus may be the basis for hostility to civilization. The urge for freedom, therefore, is directed against particular forms and demands of civilization or against civilization altogether. It does not seem that any influence could induce a man to change his nature to a termite's. No doubt he will defend his claim of individual liberty against the will of the group. A good part of the struggles of mankind center around the single task of finding an expedient accommodation, one that will bring happiness between the claims of the individual and the cultural claims of the group. And one of the problems that touches the fate of humanity is whether or not such an accommodation can be reached by some particular form of civilization, or whether this conflict is irreconcilable. The French Revolution gave birth to a tendency of modern capitalist societies that is rightly called the revolutionary intelligentsia. These are intellectuals, students, artists, writers, and activists who feel alienated from society and seek to build a new world. These bohemians or radicals existed all across Europe in the 1800s and now exist in almost every country in the world. It is a middle-class current in which youths are significantly represented. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were among these strata, debating with other left Hegelians in the cafes of Paris and London. Marxism emerged as the dominant current among the students and intellectuals of Europe who felt the bourgeois revolutions had failed to deliver a truly just society, and that building Jerusalem required further storming of barricades and firing of rifles. While conservatives throughout Europe sought to reinforce religion, patriarchy, and tradition, the organized political left became associated with the lifting of restraints on human impulses. The Marxists generally sought to come to power by giving workers permission to be angry at their bosses, giving women permission to be angry at traditional gender roles, giving youth permission to be angry at authority, and combining this anger into a gigantic social explosion in which the revolutionaries could take power. This was the method of the French Revolution, and throughout Europe it was quite effective. Karl Marx participated in the 1848 German Revolution, as did Friedrich Nietzsche and Richard Wagner. The unleashing of passion was certainly evident in the 1848 events, as peasants marched off to battle singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in the hopes of toppling local nobles and aristocrats and uniting the various territories into a modern nation-state governed by a democratic republic. The failure of the 1848 German Revolution resulted in a mass exodus from Germany by the socialists, radicals, and religious fanatics who had fought on the front lines. The various Marxist revolutionaries of the 20th century, Lenin, Trotsky, Mao, Castro, and Guevara, among others, originated among the revolutionary intelligentsia as wealthy students who studied revolutionary ideas and sought to remake the world around them. Many of them learned how to effectively unleash the rage of peasants, workers, and students against the semi-feudal systems of the past working and utilized of the developing world and utilized unleashing the passions in order to take power. Mao Zedong, for example, knew very well how to tap into the anger of the peasants against the landlords, as well as the anger of the youth at China's highly traditional Confucian family structure. Rage at the old regime was very visible in the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution with the destruction of churches. The large number of executions of figures from the Batista regime in the early years of the Cuban Revolution harnessed similar anger. However, when communists have taken power, they hold on to power by appealing to very different emotions. The strength of the Soviet Union was not that it gave permission to individuals to unleash their rage, but rather that it provided a sense of community and joint effort that enabled the country to rapidly industrialize. The PBS documentary film Red Flag 1917, produced after the fall of the Soviet Union, featured interviews with Tatiana Fedorova. As a youth, Tatiana had been a leader of construction projects during Stalin's 5-year plans to industrialize the Soviet Union. The full transcript of her interview has been published online. Fedorova described feelings of building the USSR into an industrial superpower, saying, quote, "Remember, people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. It was one of the most difficult times to build this country. To build these great construction sites would only be possible through the unity of the people and the love of their people and the love of the people for their idol. Stalin, for us, was an idol. The 5-year economic plans of the Soviet Union were viewed with wonder by the entire capitalist world. While capitalism was having a Great Depression, the Soviet Union was being transformed into an industrial superpower. Illiteracy was wiped out. The entire country was electrified and provided with running water. A modern agricultural system with tractors was constructed, as was a modern steel and oil refining industry. With socialist central planning, the Soviet Union was able to build itself up into an industrial society that defeated the Nazi invaders and launched the first spacecraft into orbit. Fedorova went on to describe the experience of building the Moscow subways. Everyone was doing the best for the country, to raise the heights of the motherland. Then there was what we were doing underground with the Moscow Metro. We worked in such a friendly way. It was such a good time. There wasn't so much to eat. We weren't well dressed, but we were simply very happy. Happy because we were making our personal contribution. When asked about her proudest moment, she said, it was when the first train went by. It was when the noise of the motor of the first train went by in this clean tunnel, which had until then only seen ordinary little carriages. You can't compare that feeling to anything. The construction workers who felt it will feel it forever. No one forced us to do it. We didn't have to do it, but we wanted to do it. It was very hard to explain, but it was a time of the enthusiasts. It was a time when Mayakovsky said that communism is the young people of the world, and we were the young people of those years. Each of us tried to build a foundation of the structures with great joy. It was like a happy song. When the interviewers from PBS pressed her about the Moscow trials and the Great Terror, asking if they tarnished her faith in socialism, she said no. No, because it was one thing, some political event which happening in every country, opposition, so forth. It was a different matter that the country was going on its way at its speed. People were working. We're talking about a country of many millions. The whole population of the country worked, lived, studied, and sang songs. That doesn't mean that everything was extinguished or everything was lost. No, it was a dark stain. It was a dark stain, but I'll repeat once more that the country was working. All the enterprises were working. The factories were working. Children were studying in schools. The fact that these political intrigues and games happened is very unfortunate. It was a very hard time, but the country was growing, and growing at great speed. There was great power. The transformation of China from being the sick man of Asia to the status of the second largest economy on earth, lifting 800 million people from poverty, has been equally inspiring and equally based on a sense of community and cooperation. Cuba's medical system that sends volunteers across the world, the mobilizations for construction and relief that enabled Hugo Chavez to become very popular in 1999, the defeat the 2002 coup, all drew heavily from this sense of solidarity and optimism. Figures like Edgar Snow, William Hinton, Anna Louise Strong all visited the socialist countries. They reported on the ability of communists to effectively defeat fascist invaders and mobilize the population, often comparing it to early Christianity. The communists were able to unleash a sense of brotherhood and community that was powerful enough to raise millions from poverty and defeat imperialist attacks. Okay, folks, I have a lot of super chats to get through. I wanted to read you the entire chapter. I go on to describe how some of the early sentiments of the revolutionary intelligentsia have been hijacked by the imperialists, and Kamala Harris is a big section of that. There's about 10 more pages left in the chapter. My voice is going to get shot. I need to read your super chats. So I'm going to cut it off right there, but maybe we'll read the rest later. That was most of chapter 2 of my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. Get your copy of it today. Good stuff. Available down below. All right, folks. Okay, all right. Before my voice wears out, we're going to do a roll call. So names and locations, and then we'll hammer out these super chats, and then we'll be done. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Who is with us this evening? Names and locations. Edinburgh, Scotland. United Kingdom. Ohio, Kevin Q. New Jersey. Australia, Sam in Cleveland, Pirate Alex in Cleveland, San Jose, Jack Dundee, Ramiro in Los Angeles. Welcome, welcome. UK, Sami Jabber, Jesus from Spain, Vallejo, California, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, Northern Ireland, Los Angeles, Orlando, Florida, Albany, New York, Lincolnite Yankee. Sorry, my throat is giving out here. Mo in Pomona, California, Denver, Colorado, Dante in Glendale, Clydebank, Scotland, Kenny in Malaysia, Kale from Hoddedick, UK, Melbourne, Australia, Northern California, welcome, welcome, welcome. Janet in Topeka, Megan in Portland, Oregon, Springfield, Missouri, Tampa, Florida, Herb Bryant, Hades in Tennessee. Greetings from Amsterdam, says Joanne. All right, Megan in Portland, Norway, Oakland, California, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Jack Dundee in the United Kingdom, Spring, Texas. Leipzig, GDR. Devin from Ohio. Liverpool, UK, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Fairhope, Alabama. Aloha from Hawaii. Ben in Toronto. Arizona, Arthur Porter, welcome, welcome. Brooklyn, New York, welcome, welcome. Love your insights, Caleb. Joplin, Missouri. Whoop, whoop, says Arthur. Whoop, whoop. Portland, Oregon, says Rudy. Atlanta. Rio de Janeiro. Harold in Naples, Florida. Chicago, Southeast UK. Brian Schaefer in Illinois. Hello. Don't forget to like and share the video. Rio de Janeiro, Fairhope, Alabama. Nicholas Lynch, People's Republic of China. One moment here. Pouring the water. South Carolina. Alexandra in Chicago. Very, very good. All right, folks. I am going to get through your super chats. All right. The first super chat was about Nasser in Egypt. Great leader, the father of Arab socialism. Built huge construction projects, built the Aswan Dam in coordination with the Soviet Union, raised millions of people out of poverty. Great leader, creator of modern Egypt. I admire Abdel Nasser in so many ways. I know he had his flaws, but I think he did a lot of great things. A great Arab leader, anti-imperialist, good stuff. All right, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Well, Turkey is playing a big role in this conflict. This is Turkey flexing its muscles. There you go. I mean, that's how I see this, and I hope that it can be resolved. I hope the tensions can de-escalate. There are disputed territories after the fall of the Soviet Union, and I hope Turkey can be calmed down and Russia is able to mediate the situation. That's my hope. We don't want another war on our hands. Makes me not like the Turkish government very much. You know, I'm already quite critical of NATO and Turkey, but you know, now I'm even more critical. You know, Turkey's a member of NATO. People forget. All right. Maupin thought. Well, there's a guy on the internet, he's in Switzerland, I believe, and he's started referring to his viewpoint as Caleb Maupin thought or something. I don't do that. I don't think that's correct. I think I just get on here and analyze things the way I see them. But, you know, I do have a unique perspective. That's true. You won't find other people talking the way I talk or talking the way I talk in writing. I do have a unique perspective. I'll give you that. So I'm glad he appreciates it. You know, I don't want to rebuff somebody who wants to talk about me in that way. But, you know, check out my work. Check out City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. You know, I'm glad he used those terms. Well, I'm not glad, but it is what it is, right? I mean, I do have a unique perspective, but I don't think I have an ism or anything like that. But it's kind of cute that he talked about Maupin thought. Okay, China undermining the U.S. dollar. Well, yeah, I mean, the USA is declaring, you know, kind of an economic war, basically, you know, forcing countries to pick China or the USA. That's going to result in a lot of countries using less U.S. currency, and that's going to weaken the U.S. dollar, no doubt about it. Color revolutions to install socialism. Well, you know, color revolutions are generally a political seizure of power, right? It is a destabilization of society in order to bring one faction to power. You know, the color revolution model, it's very effective in socialist states because it involves, you know, making the police afraid to fire on crowds and stuff. And in socialist countries, the police and the population are more intertwined. Color revolutions are designed to bring down anti-imperialist states, to bring down socialist states. They're not really designed to bring down capitalist states. I think there might be color revolutions when one faction of the ruling class is fighting another faction. That kind of thing goes on. But in terms of bringing socialism through a color revolution, no. I mean, in order to change from capitalism to socialism, you need a widespread mobilization of the whole population. Color revolutions are made for TV. They're made-for-TV coups. Color revolutions are coups. They just have a lot of, you know, made-for-TV protests in the process. But they're basically coups. I mean, it's an overthrow of the government by factions within the deep state that are aligned with one faction. The protests and all of that create an atmosphere that makes it, you know, acceptable. But they're made-for-TV coups, basically. All right. Would I rather be called a Nazgul or a Nazgul? Well, Nazgul, I believe, is a Lord of the Rings term. It refers to some of the villains that are associated with the Dark Lord and the Lord of the Rings. Nazgul is a term for a political party that existed in Russia during the 1990s that no longer exists, that stupid people on the internet have referred to as a slur. So, you know, it's cute. They're similar terms, but, you know, whatever. Alrighty. Vietnam-China hostilities, whole history of hostility there. China actually invaded Vietnam at one point during the Kampuchea War. You know, when China was aligned with the United States during the late Gang of Four era, and then later during the rise of Deng Xiaoping, China invaded Vietnam to support Cambodia and Pol Pot. And that, you know, Vietnam and China, there's disputed islands, there's thousands of years of ethnic tension, and it's deeply unfortunate, and that we need to figure out, you know, I think it would be good if these two socialist countries could respect each other and cooperate together. The tension between the two of them doesn't help anybody. You know, both countries are socialist. Both countries have really benefited from having market reforms. So I hope that they can get along. Did Marx believe in using the state? Yes, he did. He made very clear that he advocated, you know, what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat, which was the working class taking control of the state. Now, he did say that the working class couldn't take hold of simply the ready-made state machinery. They had to build a new state. He made that very, very clear in his writings on the Paris Commune, Civil War in France, and such. But yeah, Marx believed in taking control of the state. You know, that's very clear. You read the manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, the word state is all through it. And, you know, the workers take control of the state. So that's very clear. Bolshevik social conservatism. Well, you know, the Bolsheviks, I mean, compared to now, they're socially conservative. But, you know, in Russia, before the Russian Revolution, they were the most socially liberal people around. I think that there was it was after the Russian Revolution that there was a compromise made, that the Russian population was deeply conservative, whereas the Bolsheviks were deeply, deeply liberal, and that what developed, what you can call the Soviet family, what Trotsky called the Thermidor in the family, was very much a compromise. Women got education, women worked in factories, daycare was created, but at the same time, the Soviet family unit was glorified, homosexuality was outlawed, abortion was outlawed, and that there was it was kind of a mixture, right, of social conservatism and social liberalism, right? It was a huge advance for women. Women got education, women became engineers and directors of factories, and women played a huge role in society, but abortion was outlawed, the family was glorified, they gave medals to women who had more than 10 babies. It was a mix, right? And that often in politics, things end up like that. When you have the most deeply conservative population, the Russian peasantry, and the most deeply liberal and radical folks, the Bolsheviks and the Marxist movement, you reach a compromise. What quote-unquote Stalinism, which was really existing socialism in one country, was a compromise, and that's what happened. All right, books on libertarianism. Well, I actually really like the book critiquing Milton Friedman's economics by Naomi Klein. It's called Shock Doctrine. Philip Thayer wrote a very good book called Europe Since 1989, critiquing Milton Friedman's economic theories and their impact in Europe since 1989. That's very, very good. There's a number of texts refuting economic theories that are very, very good and highly recommended, that I recommend. Those are the two that come to mind, Philip Thayer and Naomi Klein. Shock Doctrine and Europe Since 1989. But there's plenty of others. I mean, there's a lot of writing. There's a history of neoliberalism. There's a whole lot of stuff that's been written. Okay. It says music. What music do I like? I'm really into folk music. I really like folk music. I try to, I do enjoy classical music as well. Sometimes to get through the day, I'll listen to like 70s rock, classic rock to get through the day. Yeah, all right. The movement towards socialism being banned from the elections in Bolivia. Well, if that is the case, then it's not a democratic election. If the party of Evo Morales is banned from the elections in Bolivia, it is not a democratic election, because that is the party the majority of people in Bolivia want to vote for, according to all the polls. Do I like anime? I've never been able to get into anime. Not my cup of tea. Not my cup of tea. Never been able to get into anime. Not my cup of tea. Biggest fear about the future. All right. Wrestling, U.S. politics. Well, I didn't watch wrestling as a kid, but there are certain themes in politics that I think translate. People building their characters getting over because the crowd likes them. There's a lot that's written about, how professional wrestling and U.S. politics are similar. I have a friend who's really into that. I don't know professional wrestling well enough, but there are certainly similar themes. I mean, last night, that was like a wrestling match, wasn't it? I mean, it was pretty disgusting. All righty. Andrew Yang. All right, well, Andrew Yang, he made the demand for universal basic income part of what his campaign is about. And in light of the economic circumstances in this country where they don't have jobs because of automation, universal basic income is a stabilizing mechanism that one section of the ruling class is probably advocating. And Andrew Yang's campaign was about getting that idea out there and floating it. And I think that, it may come to the point that the ruling class, in order to stabilize the country, as we normalize low wages and mass unemployment, gives everyone a UBI. That may be possible. I'm not opposed to people getting that kind of assistance, but that's not the answer. The answer is a rationally planned economy, socialism, getting beyond the rule of profits. Andrew Yang says he believes in human-centered capitalism. There is no such thing as human-centered capitalism. Capitalism is profit-centered. If it ain't profit-centered, it ain't capitalism. There is no such thing as human-centered capitalism. All capitalism is crony capitalism. All capitalism is profit-centered. If it's human-centered, that's called socialism. All right. Soviet referendum. Yeah, well, the smaller republics throughout the former USSR voted in bigger numbers against the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So this notion the Soviet Union was repressing all these national minorities, they all wanted freedom. Actually, why did they vote? All the smaller republics voted in big numbers to stay with the USSR. So that just didn't fit the narrative whatsoever. Not at all. What is my biggest fear about the future? Well, my fear is that we won't get a constructive socialism. We won't get a mass movement to save this country from the disaster that it's facing. We need a constructive, optimistic socialism. The synthetic left is a nightmare. The right wing is a nightmare. We need to get beyond the synthetic left. We need a constructive socialism. That's what we need. And if this can't catch on, if we can't have a socialism about building things, not tearing them down, if we just continue to have a crude Freudian manipulation be the basis of what socialist thought is, it's only going to be disaster. So that's my biggest fear about the future, is that the synthetic left and the destructive right, and I mean, we're just going to have more destruction. We need optimism. We need hope. We need cooperation. That's what we need. We don't need hate. We don't need tearing things down. We need hope for the future. We need optimism. All right, folks. Thanks for sticking around. It's been fun. I think I'm going to cut it off here, wrap it up here. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. Whoa. I haven't read that book. I'll have to check it out, about perestroika and its impact in Azerbaijan and Armenia. I'll have to check it out. Thanks for recommending the book. I'm not familiar with it. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Have a good afternoon, folks. Happy October.